Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be talking about the year that AI shook the world and hardly anybody noticed. All right, let's start out. First of all, let's talk about a contest that went on from 2010 to 2017. What this contest is it's ImageNet, and ImageNet provided 1.2 million training images. And different companies or different universities, people studying AI would enter this contest trying to have their AI identify images in the pictures, as many as possible. All right, this went well. For the year 2010, 11 teams participated, and NEC Laboratories, they are from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and they had almost a 53% exact, they identified it perfectly. And top 5 accuracy, a 71, almost 72% accuracy. What top 5 means is you might have the choice between dozens and dozens of whatever, or millions. I'm not sure. There are thousands probably of identifications. And if you get in the top 5, it's marked as a good. You got it. And in this particular case in 2011, they stopped using that top 1. I'm not sure all the reasons. There are several reasons. You could look it up yourself if you want. It's pretty easy to look it up. But not sure of all the reasons. Nevertheless, they dropped the top 1 and they went to just the top 5. And the next year, we got an improvement. It's just over 74% accuracy with the top 5. Then in 2012, we got more than 20 people or 20 groups who are competing. And these groups, out of all these, AlexNet from the University of Toronto dominate with an almost 85% accuracy for the top 5. And this will go up and up in the years until by 2017, it's way beyond human ability to identify pictures. So let's get into a little bit about the science behind it. And okay, I'm going to give you a warning right here. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an AI expert on this stuff. What I do is I try to simplify and find it so I can understand it. And if I can understand it, I hope I can pass it on for you to understand it. But before we get into the science of it all, let me tell you about the people from the University of Toronto who were involved. First of all, we have Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI. He's been called the godfather of AI simply because he held on to a certain theory, which I'm going to get into here in a minute, but he held on to a certain theory that was very unpopular for many years. In fact, when he went through to get his PhD, his advisors said, stay away from that field because nobody who had any kind of credibility would dare to get into that field. It's been tried, failed miserably. A book was written about the whole thing called Perceptrons, saying this is a dead-end road, and everybody believed that book. All right. And it was at the time a dead-end road because they didn't have enough data and they didn't have enough power. They didn't have enough anything. They needed a heck of a lot more. So anyway, but Geoffrey Hinton, he saw the possibilities in this, and so he chased after it. I'm going to prove to the world that this will work, this particular form of AI, and it's called basically deep learning. And so he's digging into that. We'll learn about that here in a second. Geoffrey Hinton, godfather of AI, he eventually works for Microsoft and then Google, and then he quits so he can go around the world warning basically of the problems with AI. Now, Alex Krizhevsky was the main person behind AlexNet. And he came up with some ideas, and he worked on it probably the hardest. Ilya Sutskever also worked for him. And these two are students, Alex and Ilya. They're just students. But they designed something that has profoundly affected AI today. And this Ilya, basically, he went on to work for OpenAI. He was one of the founders for OpenAI. That's ChatGPT, for any of you who didn't know that. And eventually he's going to found a company called the Safe Superintelligence, SSI. And here is the basics. First of all, they're dealing with deep learning or neural nets. It's based on the human brain. The human brain has neurons and synapses. Synapses are the connections between neurons. And when we learn things, and when our brain is active, it's constantly changing the width or the strength of these synapses, these connectors. So when I learn something, some will probably grow, and they've even found occasionally that some will start from nothing. I'm sure there's something there, but it seems to be completely born without any kind of background. It just kind of appears. But that's not as common as just one that grows and shrinks according to whatever is going on in our brain. So that when we learn, these things are happening all the time. And even as we look at things, these things are changing. Just no matter what we do, they seem to do this kind of back and forth and reconnecting and stuff. So anyway, to make a long story short, over the years, they pretty much developed a deep learning for computers. And in computers, we have nodes that serve kind of as the neuron, and we have connections that serve as the synapses. And what they do is they've made it so that you put in the input, you're looking for an output, and then you have deep layers or hidden layers. And those deep layers the connections will adjust stronger or weaker constantly as we send message through looking for an answer. Then we tell it that was, we let the computer know. It's trained to do this on its own sometimes, and sometimes it's just, I don't want to get into all that. But basically, these connections adjust in strength, more or less. It goes back and forth, and that back and forth is called back propagation, and then the forward pass. It's going back and forth several times a second, sometimes hundreds of times a second. And eventually it comes out with a very good response. And that's how deep learning works. The issue with deep learning is you have deep layers or hidden layers. And those deep layers, doing all that back and forth stuff, it's opaque. We don't know what's going on in there. So we may come up with an answer. We come up with black boxes. We come up with hallucinations, especially at first when things like ChatGPT first came out. There were a lot of wild stuff going on. Nevertheless, it's getting better and better and less because they're working on it. All right, let's move on. That's deep learning. The next thing is convolutional neural network. And I do have to forewarn you, I'm not an expert in these areas. I like to focus a lot on the history and on the social aspect of it. I'm less inclined to know a lot about the technology itself and the mathematics behind it, coding, or any of that kind of stuff. Why? Because whatever, you guess, whatever, it doesn't matter. The next part of AlexNet is the convolutional neural network. And the convolutional neural network basically sees the image as numbers. The first layers in this deep layer thing going on, the first layer is find the basic patterns like edges and corners. This is what the eyeball does, by the way. So they're basing it loosely on what the eye does. And so we first see layers and find basic patterns like edges and corners. The deeper layers then spot bigger shapes and textures, focusing on important details. And then it looks at all of these for final patterns. And when those final patterns are done, it makes a tremendous guess. This is probably it. And as you've seen, this was huge advancement in AI in 2012. Now, there were some ripple effects that took place because of 2012, this ImageNet. And the first thing we see is that deep learning now comes out of the closet. I think it was slowly getting out before that, but in 2012, after this, people could be proud to say, I am a true believer in deep learning. And so deep learning skyrockets, and it is basically the center of a lot of stuff. OpenAI, a lot of your chatbots nowadays are centered on or coming from deep learning. Now, so deep learning skyrockets. It triggers an AI boom across the fields. There are a lot of different theories about how to build AI. And all of all of a sudden, all these different fields are getting a lot more funds. And the hype is rising as well as the funds. Oh, this could save humanity. This could save global warming. This could save this. This could save. We could be just having a whole new world. It also popularizes GPUs, which are gaming chips. Some developers realize these gaming chips are far deeper and can do a lot more with AI than the old CPUs. And so they began turning to the GPUs. And not a lot of people were doing this. There were a few here and there. But when people began noticing the big difference with AlexNet, they wanted to know how, and they read the papers, and they dug in, and they found out GPUs were critical. And so the whole world of AI gradually turned over to NVIDIA's GPUs. And NVIDIA skyrocketed basically in the 2016, 2017, and beyond. Now, there was a division at this time, and there always has been, of the doomers and accelerationists. The accelerationists want to push hard and push hard. We need to save humanity, get this thing going. The doomers saying, let's be safe, let's do this ethically, make sure we hold back, and make sure everything's good before we dig in. And a lot of this has to do with the dystopians versus the utopians. The dystopians, this is powerful. This could destroy the world. This could really, it could go its own direction. That's not our direction. It's not connected to the way we want it to go. And this actually goes all the way back, I think it was 1942. There was a short science fiction story about a robot. They gave the robot certain rules. Those rules have been the basis of ethics and safety protocol for AI developers. Finally, artificial intelligence at this point begins to accelerate exponentially. Now, I don't know before 2012 if it was going exponential or if it was probably more of a straight line upward. But at this point, it just takes off. It goes so fast. Now, for me to explain exponential, for anybody who really doesn't get it, I've read places that some people have a hard time grasping this. And in case you are one of those people, let me explain. When I was a kid, I gave a story to a class because we all had to tell stories, make up a story, just because the teacher wanted to see if we were doing well grammatically. And I was in second grade, I think. And I was a storyteller. I used to tell stories to my family. Not lying. I just make up stories about these creatures, mice or something, talking to each other, whatever. Well, in this particular story, I wrote that I had a spider that I found, and I started talking to it. And it was talking to me, and he was a real nice, friendly spider. And I liked him, and so we became friends. And a few days later, I noticed that he had a few babies. So it wasn't a he, it was a she. And not only that, but those babies kind of quickly grew. And a week later, they all had babies. And 2 weeks later, we have thousands of babies. That is exponential growth. It grows tremendously and quickly. And that's what's going on with AI. Very few things slow it down, but that's another video. But right now, I'll just focus on it grew exponentially, just like that spider in my story. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. Please comment and follow. Comments are very important. I like comments, and definitely I would like to respond to a lot of your comments and learn from them. So let me know what you think. This is Ted.